This meeting is a working session of the board to conduct the business of the district. The agenda for today's meeting has been published, and the agenda items to be discussed and or voted on have been studied by board members. I'll introduce the people here on the dais with me. To my far left is Recording Secretary Cindy Benson, Superintendent Larry Francois, board members Amy Cast, Sandy Hayes, Don McCravey, and Kimberly D'Angelo will be back momentarily. Agendas for this meeting, as well as minutes from our previous meeting, are available on the table at the back. If you are here to address the board on agenda items, please sign in on the clipboard that's available on the table, and you'll have an opportunity near the beginning of the meeting for your comments. First order of business is the superintendent's report.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll have a relatively short report this afternoon. I want to begin by thanking our teachers, our principals, and our support staff for a great start to the 2015-16 school year. Despite some normal beginning of the year hiccups, the schools I was able to visit late last week were quickly moving into powerful classroom instruction, very orderly. Kids were eagerly engaged in learning. I want to give some special kudos and thanks to support services, capital projects, and transportation for all their efforts to accommodate not only our continuing enrollment growth, but also the implementation of our enrollment mitigation plan and facilitating numerous student and program changes impacting our transportation services this year. On the first day of school, I was at Frank Love, helping to greet 330 kindergarten students, their parents, and their younger siblings. And despite the massive humanity, it was an extremely organized, positive, and welcoming experience for those students and families. Yeah, we always know when we start before Labor Day that we probably won't have a really accurate count as to our beginning of year enrollment probably until the end of this week, as we continue to have families that will begin to trickle back in from their summer vacations. On August 31st, along with President Quinn and Director Hayes and board members and superintendents from the South Whidbey, Riverview, Lake Stevens, Monroe, and Marysville school districts, we met with Leanna Hotek, who's the Education Policy Analyst for Senator Patty Murray. We were able to share our deep appreciation to Senator Murray for her work to bring forward a bipartisan and dramatically improved reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Ms. Hotek was hopeful that the upcoming conference committee between the House and Senate around the ESEA reauthorization could achieve a positive outcome and a compromise bill acceptable to both houses. And we were able to discuss a broad range of educational policy issues at the federal level and felt our concerns and interests were sincerely sought and appreciated by Senator Murray's staff. And I again want to acknowledge and thank President Quinn for her role in facilitating this meeting as well as the earlier meeting with Representative Delvin.
Thank you, Larry. Well, the North Shore School District Board of Directors has set aside a period of up to 60 minutes to receive updates and comments from association leaders and citizens from our community. The board expects speakers to address matters related to district operations, policies, procedures, and agenda items under consideration by the board. Comments should not make reference to any employee or representative of the district by name or by identifiable reference. Board meetings are not the appropriate setting for personnel complaints. If interested, there is a complaint process available through the Office of the Superintendent. Please note that because of the public governance process, the board may ask clarifying questions regarding topics not on the meeting's agenda, but will likely defer discussion to a future meeting if warranted, in order for staff to prepare any necessary background information, for board members to review, and for the item to be included on a published agenda for the benefit of others that might have an interest. Alternatively, a district employee or board member may respond to individuals offering public comment at a later date if warranted. When addressing the board, please state your name clearly for our records. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes, and there is a timer that will sound when your time has expired. We thank you for your participation in the governance process, and we will begin with association leaders. Sherry, do you want to come up first?
Hello, I'm Sherry Rudolph, North Shore Council PTSA President. I'm so excited to be here, beginning another school year. Although, excuse me if I tear up throughout this year, it's my last child, this senior this year, and so I've had one in school since 1998, so it'll be weird to think about the future, but I'm excited. I'm sure you all are. We've been evaluating a lot of our communication methods this year, the board has, and so starting some new things, and it's already quite a lot of information gathered. We have a closed Facebook group for only presidents of the different local units, and they can put forth their questions, and it's been a very successful method so far, and just bringing questions that we really didn't even know were happening. That's kind of how we found out some of the PTA expenditures versus school expenditures were happening, and we could kind of even that out. And so that's why Nancy's like, oh, thank you for giving me that great assignment that I get to. So I really appreciate Nancy came last time because I had an Inglemore PTA conflict. We also had a great meeting last week with the foundation. I just love President Becky Birch, and she's co-president with Michelle's, of course, but I met with Becky. And then our liaison this year is going to be Anna Adams, who's on their board. And she's a PTA president at 2 different schools. So just, I think, a great balance, and I think the other presidents will, gain so much more understanding of what the roles are and how they work in cooperation to the benefit of all students in the district. So I'm really excited about that because those are 2 very smart ladies to work with. Also scheduled and have on our Facebook page an event October 5th, which is a Monday, which is the School Board Candidate Forum. So far we have not, some of our PTAs have not gotten a lot of confirmation on a room reservation, so hoping to have it in this room, but I don't have any confirmation yet. We've submitted some of our stuff quite a while ago, so we're trying to make sure that it's here. If not, I will let you know the new location, and that will be on our Facebook page as well. So on that event page, it does have the link to the public, or they can submit questions for the 4 candidates. So we're hoping to be able to prioritize those questions that we receive, and that will be the body of the forum. So our hope is to be a valuable advocacy tool for the North Shore community. Thanks.
Thank you, Sherry. Any other associations? Nope, seeing none, we'll move to citizen comments, of which there are none. So we will move on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion on any of the items that you see listed in the minutes? Payment of bills, personnel report, highly capable program I-grant, and the State Board of Ed minimum basic education compliance for this school year. Seeing none, we'll call for a vote.
Hank, show me.
And that does pass unanimously. Next item on the agenda is the second reading of board policy number 3246, use of isolation, restraint devices, and other uses of reasonable force. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote.
I had a question for Governor Hayes. Did you serve, when you served on a committee, was this part of what we were discussing? I believe it was, wasn't it? This change.
Yeah, the committee that I'm on is the Washington State Special Education Coalition, and this was one of the bills that they were supporting. They were not a sponsor of it, but they were definitely supporting. It's cleaning up the version of this that was passed a year ago that had some holes in it.
Thank you.
No problem.
Seeing no further discussion, we'll call for a vote. And that also passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is the second reading of board policy number 3423, student sports, concussion, head injury, and sudden cardiac arrest. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
I had a question at the last meeting on this. Did staff have an opportunity to find out anything more about my question? And is that why Dr. Bigelow's here? Perhaps? My question was about how many kids do we have getting concussions during the year?
So I don't have that directly in front of me, but we did include summaries that were in the board briefing following that meeting.
My mailbox has been having issues, so I haven't seen that, but thank you then. How many?
We should have provided that hard copy. I would need to look off the top of my head. I don't recall specifically.
I was,
Do you recall?
not specific numbers, but I did, the data showed the national level, it's football and girls soccer, and that was definitely matched. Because they also, in addition to the number, those were the two most frequent causes of injury or concussion. That was my takeaway from it. But it wasn't a huge number, but definitely more than two. How's that roll?
More than two. Okay, so I think I've gotten my mailbox problem solved, so
Okay.
we gotta find that.
Seeing no further discussion, we'll call for a vote. And that also passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is the second reading of Board Policy Number 7130, Fund Balance. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second. Discussion on this item?
I just have a question. How long would the 3% last us, let's say, approximately? And I just thought of this today. If, let's say that the legislature next year did not increase, it's a rainy day fund, so would it get us through approximately 6 months or at the current levels? Probably not a fair question, but I mean, I just am curious, like a range of like,
We're
Less than 3 weeks.
oh, less than 3 weeks. Okay, that's good to know.
Okay.
Is there any thought of then increasing that to get us through a longer period of time? Or, you know, I know that all of you have gone through the cutbacks, but since I haven't been a part of that, you know, when times were more lean, you know, is there any possibility of trying to increase that somewhat to get us 3 months? Or is that just not realistic or legal?
Probably not realistic when you consider that 3 months would be, with a $230 million annual operating budget would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $60 million. So that's probably not realistic. We had great debate amongst the board prior to your time here about the appropriate level to set the fund balance at, and I think that was a 6 or 7 reading policy, or 4 or 5 at least.
We had a range many years ago, 2 to 4%, and there was a lot of concern over having a range. Of course, some people wanted us at the low end of the range, some people wanted us at the higher end of the range, the 4%, so the 3% was what the board approved. You know, certainly rainy day funds are useful. It can be challenging to adjust programs to carve that out in a short period of time too.
We tend to, if you think to the most recent 16 district comparison, the 16 largest school districts in the state, we tend to be on the lower end of fund balance of those 16 districts. However, our fund balance also is very stable. And so when we have gone out for bond sales or bond refinancing, as we'll be coming up on in the next month and a half or so, the rating agencies always note that our fund balance is on the lower end, but they also always note that our fund balance is very stable as well. So it's been a debate about whether we're better off spending the resources on the students we have in our schools today versus, as Lydia said, the difficulty of perhaps looking at where we would trim expenditures in order to build up a fund balance.
And so what is that higher end? I mean, what kind of range are we looking at? You said we're on the lower end, what's the higher end?
So our fund balance probably runs in the 6 to 7% of total, when you look at the total, in total. And you might see districts of our size more on the higher end, might be the 10 to 12% range.
Could you explain stable? What do you
Stable.
mean by that word?
Stable means it's both a stable dollar figure and stable as a percentage of overall expenditures.
I believe it was explained to me that since we set that policy and we maintain that policy, that that's what they're looking at when they're looking at the bonds.
They look at the whole entire fund balance, which includes our set-aside for the new high school, set-asides for curriculum, set-asides for collective bargaining agreement provisions. So they look at it in totality.
So again, what you guys have told me in the past was that the bond rating is based on that we have a policy and you're following it. You're also saying that they're looking at the actual money that's in those and that they're looking at you following the budget then?
So first they look to make sure that you have a policy regarding fund balance, specifically this one. Then they look at not only the unassigned funds, but the total fund balance trend line over time, and with respect to number of students and the size of your budget.
Over time going up, for instance, so to say that we were to increase our fund balance to 4% or even 5%, that moving up would not mean that we would receive a poor bond rating.
Unlikely.
Okay. Moving down might.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So just for the future, not for this current, passing this policy this year, but for the future, I know we're going to be, looking at the budget coming in the next few months, our first round of looking at it for next year. Did you appreciate me saying that, reminding you? Maybe this is part of what we could put into our discussion. I know we'll have new board members on board, and then Amy and I being new and not being part of that original discussion, is this the right amount? Should we look at increasing it slightly? So maybe we can kind of wrap that into, I know I would like to discuss that, so I don't know if anyone else would like to, when we have the budget discussion, I'm not saying right now. It's part of the future budget discussion.
I won't be here.
But I would certainly be in favor of that, although I won't be here. I think that that would be an excellent conversation for the board to have. It's always made me extremely uncomfortable that we don't have enough to make it through half a month with our people's salaries or to keep people employed more than half a month. I think it's always concerned me a bit. So I would be thinking that's a great idea.
One of the differences the bond rating agencies always note is our funding mechanism in Washington State, with roughly 2/3 of our funding coming from the state in very regular intervals, differs from a lot of states. And so they make an allowance for the fact that in Washington State in general, districts carry smaller fund balances than you might see in other states where the funding comes in a different way and in a different timing.
In other states, the funding's predominantly property taxes, which are received usually in 2 big chunks during the year. So they have to have sufficient resources to get them through the heavy tax collection months. Versus we get between 5.5% to 9%, actually 10% from the state each month. The low amount coincides with the heavy property tax months. The highest months are the summer months that are the leanest, so it stabilizes us through the year.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking more like not if we didn't, I said if we, something happened with the state and our allocation of money, but I'm also thinking if, some reason we didn't pass a levy or something in the future, that we would have a certain amount of time. Right, and I don't want to be putting that out there, but the reality is some districts haven't, and just thinking ahead and strategically, thinking of problems before they happen. So that's why I would want to have that conversation, and just so we all.
So Kimberly, I'm going to recommend that you bring that up in the
But I'm
first
also letting Larry.
opportunity that you have
Right.
budget session.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, prepared. Nice.
Seeing no further discussion, we'll call for a vote. And that passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is the first reading of Board Policy Number 4314, Notice of Threats of Violence or Harm. board members have had an opportunity to view this in board briefing. This is the first official reading.
I have a question, Carolyn, just to get your thoughts on something, you know. So this is, first of all, I have to say, this is very indicative of the work folks have been doing over the summer, really looking at, you know, how to take a good look at what we have to do better. I think it's great, and it just got my brain thinking, in any of your research, have you ever seen any information on there? It talks about individual directed threats and building directed threats, but anything about threats directed at protected classes, like groups of kids? I don't know if there would be anything from a policy perspective. I'm trying my equity lens for the first time here, but anything from a policy perspective we'd want to think about if a threat was directed at a whole group of kids, but not an entire building, if we'd have to look at that different. And this is just a theoretical.
I don't know if we've seen anything like that, but if you remember back to the memorandum that I believe Heather prepared that sort of summarized some of the takeaways from the investigation report, that was embedded in the #1 recommendation of that report, which is when we have a threat situation, are we viewing it in the appropriate scope and scale of what it may encompass, which could include exactly what you're talking about, which is are we perceiving it perhaps as targeted at an individual, or we should perhaps be perceiving it as targeted more broadly at a group of individuals or some representation of students or staff members. And so it's not from a policy perspective, but it's certainly on our radar from a practice perspective.
And would it be helpful for it to be in the policy? Would it be,
I'm wondering if it would go on
or in the
Because
procedure?
That's what I'm thinking, because if it says students and school employees,
Right.
could we then better define it or more delineate it a little bit more in a procedure?
Yeah.
I'm just, that's
In
a
terms of
potential.
notification, yeah, in terms of notification, so if a student is a member of that group that has been specifically called out in a threat, then the notification would go to the whole group.
It's more of an awareness issue for our administrators to be sure that we are giving a broad consideration to any threatening situation to make sure we're seeing it as completely and comprehensively as we can.
And I can look at the decision-making matrix again and remember that decision-making
Right.
tree to make sure that I know we talk about the threat and when it goes which way.
Right, which is crazy thorough. Yeah.
I'm trying to catch up with you, and I'm trying to think procedurally how you would, as a principal, limit just the kids that, how you would determine
Notify
this is
just
the
the
group,
group instead of.
and wouldn't you just do the whole building?
You might not limit it, but maybe there's some wording we can use, and I haven't looked at the WASDA procedure yet that might, specifically talk about, a phrase that we could use. Students including groups of students, individual, XYZ or something.
Yeah, I guess when I was thinking in terms of the different ways of who we're communicating with, and if it was, say, targeted to Hispanics, would you just limit Hispanic families that you were notifying that this threat had happened, or would you basically notify the whole school?
Probably impacts the whole school anyways.
I guess I'm trying to think of a situation where if it was a group that was targeted, where you would just limit it to the families that were part of that group, and could you know everybody that was in that group? And maybe
Would you just
We
notify
could
the
just
whole school
notify the
community?
The whole
Yeah.
school anyways, right? Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, we can do a little research, get the team together, and when we get to the procedural part, and see if there's a way of doing that or not, and we can report back.
Well, I mean, and since you did the research, it was just something.
I didn't see it in policy.
Yeah, exactly. If it would help the procedure to have some specifics talking about any groups in policy, or if it was irrelevant, if it just goes to the building level anyways.
You think of what
Yeah.
Virginia and the work that they've done at the state level for all of Virginia wasn't in that work as well.
Okay. But it's not a specific request, it's more just a brainstorming if it was something that would be helpful to have an intermediary level
Yeah.
between individual and building.
That's a good question.
John, you had a question?
So this agenda item did not come in my board packet at all.
It was in the briefing. We get the briefing ahead of time, and then
I have nothing in my board packet on this agenda item.
Would you like to?
So
I don't know.
apologize, it was
Because I didn't see it either.
it was added on after the
That's why.
packet was initially published, and was it mailed?
To clarify,
Separate
John and I
mail.
get ours mailed to us.
Right.
We
It was-
get
I'm sorry, it was-
electronically.
It was
so that's
mailed,
why
it was
we're-
mailed separately,
Yeah.
and perhaps with the holiday, it may not have.
I didn't, yeah, because I was looking for it also, but I pulled it up here.
Yeah, but it was in the briefing part.
And this is the first reading, so you'll have an opportunity to think about it before the next
Do
time
you,
we're looking at it.
would you like my hard copy?
Yes, please, thank you.
I pulled it up.
Then don't ask me
I don't ask you a question, oh, because
So,
you
but
don't have.
briefly looking through this, and again, I didn't have this in my board packet. So briefly looking through this, my question would be, how is this, and maybe you already answered this, but how is this different than the bullying policy?
Well, the bullying is the harassment, intimidation, and bullying, and it may not lead to a threat of violence, and this is specifically about threats of violence or harm. So, I mean,
So the difference being, I'm just trying to understand the two different policies. So one is more psychological harm, and this would be
No, you
more
could have-
physical harm?
you could have this, so the harassment, intimidation, and bullying policy is within the Student 3000 series, and this covers, it's a greater, kind of a broader perspective, or I guess more, because it's about employees, it's about community members, it's about
Threats to school.
it's threats to school, and that might not be bullying. I mean, and we have on occasion had students who want to close, it would be great to have a day off, and so they perhaps do some kind of threat about bombs, or, there's a variety of things, and that's at a school level and not at an HIV harassment, intimidation, bullying.
So can I ask why, it's just right off the bat in the first paragraph, feeling safe is an essential necessity for each individual to be fully productive as they conduct district-related business. And in parentheses, it says, after any form of violence, including domestic violence. Why would we be striking those?
Including domestic violence?
Including domestic violence, or I'm just wondering, okay, so if they were in to begin with, why are we striking them?
That was in our safe school environment policy, and I think when you look at the threat and harm to school, to the threats of violence or harm, I think in this time we would probably put the types in procedure versus listing them in a policy, because I don't think we could list them all. And if you start saying including this one, well, why didn't we include that one? And again, it was
So that explains the including domestic violence. What about the feeling safe is an essential necessity?
I think what we were, I'll take ownership. I think what I was trying to do is try to connect more to the WASDA policy and pull it into the current language. It's more than feeling safe at school. That is a part of it. I mean, feeling safe at school is what we want to have all employees and students and parents and staff members. I mean, we can add back in, but I'm trying to get the flow.
I don't know how anyone else feels, but I actually like that. I hear what you're saying, but the feeling safe is an essential necessity. I guess it sounds to me like it's saying it's a human right. It's your right as an individual to feel safe. And that, without that, you can't be, it's very difficult to be productive. So I don't know how the rest of you feel about that, but
So the WAS, well, we can.
These are pretty substantial changes to language in the third paragraph in this, though, where it says abusive or suggestive language will not be tolerated even if it does not create a threatening atmosphere or lead to a threat. What does that mean for say, my principal, who's sitting in the audience, when he's trying to follow this policy and someone is using abusive or suggestive language, and he wants to say, you can't do that, but it's been taken out of policy.
Well, this is under the threats of violence or harm. We would see that in a different, I think, in
Still
a
be
different
in the-
policy
The
and
school
procedure
handbook.
in the R&R, right?
Which
We're
policy is it in though?
Well, you're asking me, I'd have to get back to you.
Okay, no, it's okay. And again, I'm asking you questions because I didn't have this and so I understand.
Yeah,
That's
I
okay.
don't-
So I'm
That one I
wondering,
don't have.
since you guys are seeing this for the first time, and I know you're trying to think on the fly, maybe we move the first reading to the next board meeting and the second reading, or,
Is there any kind of speed that this needs to pass under?
No.
I would appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good idea. That's a good idea. Thank you, Sandy. So we'll bring this back for a second first reading next week. Next board meeting.
Carolyn, just for clarification, so the policy as it's presented for first reading and the attached memo are identical to what was in the board briefing, even though it may not have gotten to, we
Correct.
mailed it separately from
I'm
the
hoping
rest of the
that
board
it
packet.
came in August the first time.
It was in the board, it was in the
When we
board
were
meeting.
talking at our last board meeting and I was doing the show and tell.
I just want to make sure there's no,
No, we did
there
not,
were no
we,
changes between the board briefing
royal-
and this.
I did not change it.
All right, thank you.
Same thing.
I've had issues with my mailbox, and I shared that with Cindy at the last couple meetings. I've had some issues. I have had my mail hand-delivered by my mailman, so I was able to get this and read it. So if we have something that is somewhere else, and I didn't get that, but I got this was what this is the agenda.
Correct.
Period,
My
paragraph.
goal
So
is-
this is what I expect to see agenda items in. I
Yeah.
did not look in board briefings for agenda items that would come, that would somehow be omitted from the agenda.
Duly noted.
we'll come back in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
See
first
what's
reading
going on
in a couple
reading.
weeks.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right.
Carolyn.
All right, next item on the agenda is board reports and communications. A couple of board members requested that the recent release of the Municipal League Report on School Governance be a topic of discussion for the board.
So, when was this requested? See, I'm a little confused. This was not brought up at a school board public meeting. And as I stated in the letter that I sent earlier for the earlier session today, I've noticed a great deal of discrepancy with the way items are added to the agenda. And so when I got this email, I obviously waited until we were all here to bring this up, but someone else was allowed to add something to the agenda without bringing it up in future agenda items, whereas I have been forced many times to only add items through bringing it up at future agenda items. So I
So
wasn't
two
real happy
people-
about that.
Two people independently requested that it be added to the agenda. So it did get added as a result.
Is two people different from one person? Because that's not the way the policy is written.
Two people is different than one person. I guess as president, I'm trying to decide whether this is a topic of discussion that will be commonly appreciated by board members, and if there is evidence that more than one person wants to discuss it, then I'm the third person, so that would be three people that were interested in discussing it, so we had a majority that were interested in discussing it. I have not spoken to either of the people that requested that this be part of the discussion, just added it to the agenda. So no discussion has gone on about this. So you don't have to take part in the conversation if you don't want to.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that just getting an item on the agenda has been problematic for me in the past 8 years, and I believe was my statement read into the record at the last meeting?
No.
I wrote a letter to the board and the superintendent and asked that it be read.
I had a class at 9 o'clock, from 9 to 11:30, and we started a retreat at 12 o'clock. So I haven't read, I knew that you had sent something, I haven't read it yet, so no. Nothing has been
Other board members read my letter.
I did not.
I was doing work before I came to the retreat.
We've been
So no
otherwise
one has
occupied.
read my statement of why I was not attending.
When did you send it?
I had to send it this morning.
I have not. My email about
I'd
9.
like to read it now.
I don't think so. I mean, but in that letter, I state that one of the problems we have as a board is getting things on the agenda, and it was directly associated with somebody's adding things to the agenda in a way that I have attempted to follow our operating protocol and add things to the agenda and been denied.
So we
one
had,
member, two member is not actually in that policy. When you read it, it just says a board member.
so we had on the agenda originally for our retreat today, we had an agenda item to be discussing a potential discrepancy between our policies. There's one policy that says that the agenda can be added to by the president. There's another board procedure that says that's a little bit more vague, and one of our opportunities for the retreat today would have been to discuss that and clarify, but you and Kimberly at the last meeting didn't want that to be part of the retreat agenda, so it was removed. So
Let me clarify. I asked that to be an agenda item last meeting because we have a new board coming on, and so that I thought that going over board operating protocols would be prudent to have the new board be a part of that discussion. So it wasn't just wanting to throw out that discussion, and that's what we talked about at the last meeting, just to give the context. So I'm not
Believe I was
disagreeing,
talking about-
yes, that is what transpired, I just want to give the
Right.
context of why that transpired.
thank you.
So
Kimberly.
my feelings were the same. It was about board protocol and setting board protocol for a board that is not in existence, that, by a board that is at this point, but the future board tying their hands, which I also said in my statement. So my letter to the board still stands. I hope that you have a time to read it. I still want to point out that this was added to the agenda following our board policy, but I have been denied that regularly. And so feel free to discuss it all you want.
So just to clarify, we have added future agenda items as one of our agenda items on every board meeting agenda, and we have an opportunity to bring it up at that point to decide whether or not, as a majority, we would like to have that item discussed. And I'll just read you board policy 1711 that says that board members wishing to suggest an agenda topic may contact the board president or superintendent or request as a future agenda item during a regular business meeting. That's the part that's a little bit in conflict, or that's a little bit more vague than, let me find the other policy. The other policy that says that the board president and superintendent set the agenda. And I can't think of any items that have been requested by a majority of the board that have not been on an agenda ever. So if I'm wrong in that, I hope that you'll correct me, and we can certainly correct that and add it to a future agenda.
So in what I wrote,
So
there are two paths for placing items on the board agenda. These paths are policed according to presidential whim. Prior to my board presidency in 2009, there was only one path for board members to add items to the agenda, which is reflected in both of those policies. I have asked for agenda items to be added per this policy and been told I don't think you have a majority of board members wanting to talk about that. This response to exclude my agenda request is in violation of the policy as written. A recent example of presidential whim occurred in the agenda for the meeting scheduled for September 8th, 2015. In 2009, we added to the business meetings agenda an item titled Future Agenda Items. This is the second path for adding items to the agenda and was subsequently added to policy. It is a practice originally established by the superintendent. I was present at the time, and Larry suggested adding this future agenda items. And I thought that was a great idea, and it seemed to go over well with the board, so we added it to policy. So in that, there are two paths to put something on the agenda. I don't mind people following the policy. I mind that I'm not allowed to follow the policy, and I just wanted to bring that up.
So that would have been an opportunity for us to clarify today, because the two policies are somewhat in conflict. 1440 reads that any additions or changes in the prepared agenda may be requested by the superintendent or a board member and must be approved by majority vote of the board members present. And part of my goal for today would have been, before the agenda item was changed, to make sure that we are treating, that those are in sync, that they make sense for one another. If you feel that there is I'd be happy to add an agenda item that has a majority consent to any board meeting, so you
No, we
let
already
me know.
have two paths to add something to the agenda. I am telling you that I'm not allowed one of those paths, but apparently someone was. So feel free to discuss the school board governance in King County, understanding board role and effectiveness, and improving K through 12 education from the Municipal League Foundation. I don't mind doing that. It was just added following our policy that I'm not allowed to access.
It was added following the majority. There were 3 people that wanted this added to the agenda, which is why it's on there.
That was not in a public meeting then.
Can I add that there's one more way to add an agenda?
Can we just
Did
move
you
on to
give
the
two?
agenda?
Well, you just gave 2, can I just, because Buzz gave us a third way today. But it's just adding on what you're saying. He said that if we, like I did last week, we're allowed to bring up an agenda item at a public meeting.
During the meeting, sure.
During the meeting, and can, like I did 2 weeks ago, that we can add the agenda item at that time. So there's 3 paths,
That's true.
including this one that Buzz
So the
talked
board
about today.
president appreciates if you notify her in advance
Well, of
of
course.
that happening, but yeah, that is an avenue for sure.
But that's just following Robert's Rules of Order.
So are we,
Just want to make
just
sure
to
we're clear on
clarify
what
what we're discussing here, are we discussing the info item or are we discussing how to add things to an agenda?
We're discussing the info item, and one of you that asked for this to be added, if you want to just open the conversation, that would be great.
Okay, so I just to kind of give the timeline, I read this, I thought there was a lot of really great information in it, a lot of the topics that we as a board have been communicating, some of them even addressing our board goals for next year, and so I asked a question, is this something we could discuss? And I was told by the board president that there was someone else that had asked a similar, so then we'd be in violation of the Open Public Meetings Act for even 2 of us to exchange an email exchange on what was in it, and so that we needed to have it at an Open Public Meetings Act. So that's my understanding of how it ended up here. And I just, like I said, I think there's a lot of really great stuff. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to read it, and so probably isn't going to be that effective of a conversation if not everybody has gone through it. But I think there's some really good takeaways, not only how we can act as a board, but also just some good information of what other school districts are doing and where districts are making a positive impact, like I said, on some of the issues that we have raised as a board that we want to work on.
So, I'll dive in with something I found valuable and wanted to ask what other board members thought about discussing this once the new board members are on, but the discussion about school board governance models, that's within the report about some specific frameworks that different school districts follow in governing how they go about their business. I thought that might be a valuable exercise for in December, or perhaps after, we'll let the new board members relax from the fire hose a little bit, but at some point to study the different school board governance models and see if there's one that we'd like to dive into deeper to become stronger and more efficient in what we do.
Kimberly.
So I did ask Larry some questions about this, or just I was trying to pose some questions that I had that were coming to my mind regarding some of the things I was reading at the time. I hadn't gone through all of it, so that might have been where it also got on the agenda. I don't think I asked for it to be on the agenda, but I did definitely ask questions about it. I'm trying to see what I actually asked here. But I thought it was a valuable, there were a lot of good things to be gleaned from it. I have gone through it, an overview of it. I haven't read all the specifics. I mean, I've read certain specific areas, but not word for word. But what you just said, Amy, about there's lots of things I could say about it, but I want to go off of what you just said. I'm trying to find what page that is on.
I was looking at page 3, where it just kind of it summarizes some different models. Gives a little overview and then summarizes 3 different
School board
models.
governance models.
Yeah.
I thought that was I wish I would have thought about that when we were in our meeting today, but I think it's good for future board goals and when we get a new board in November, is because I think this is a real interesting lens of how do we all come to the table in writing our goals, how do we see our roles, how do we see our roles in the community, and I'm looking at these, I'm going balanced governance. That's really where I'm at. I'm going, I bet many of us, or not saying you guys, but I bet there's a lot of people on our team that might not look at it through a balanced governance lens, and so I just thought that was such an interesting, right there, if we're starting off with a different model of what do we think school board governance is. And so just for the information for the audience, so I always feel it's hard to have this conversation with you guys sitting out there, even though it's between us. I just want to read one quick little section so you can, or I guess it's up there now, good. But there's 3 models: policy governance, constitutional governance, and school board governance models. And it gives us 4 different models of how does a school board operate, and these are different questions that we ask ourselves that we're constantly having to define. What is our role? How far down into the weeds do we dig? What is our relationship with the administration? Because of course we want a collaborative relationship, but where does that end? Where does it begin? And so of course that brings up, if we're looking at different models, different methodologies, different ways of frameworks, I guess, different frameworks, that's going to lead us to very different points. So that might be a potential future board retreat topic. A positive out of that I had, not that that's a negative, but a positive item that came out of this school board report was that North Shore School District, and correct me if I'm not saying this right because I'm going by memory, they mentioned several times in here, though we have a higher free reduced lunch population, we are actually graduating students at the same rate as more wealthier districts. So the question could be, what are the wealthier districts? I mean, there's lots of methodological issues I might ask in here, which led me to ask Larry several questions. Does that mean that our free reduced lunch population was lower in the years that they were looking at this with people graduating, is now increased? Does our achievement gap decrease as people go throughout the years, or do we have different outcomes, or I don't know if it's different outcomes, but different levels of knowledge that we expect students to attain compared to the other districts that are graduating their students at the same rate? What are we doing different? Is there something in our population that changes over time? And then Larry answered back that we do have a population that tends to be migrant, fluctuates in and out in the free reduced population.
Free and reduced lunch population in general tends to be more transient. than
Transient,
other
that was the word.
Population, so that tracking of what we do know, what we have verified through an earlier study of the district is the longer students are in North Shore, the better they perform. When you have a population that's more transient, you're probably going to have more variability in their achievement levels.
We see that in schools sometimes when we are on the school visits to Crystal Springs. The longer they're there, the better they perform.
And I don't know if our population's increased in the younger years, and are we gonna see that graduation rate go down potentially? That was another thing that I thought that we should potentially look at. And I know there's lots of things to look at in this. That was another,
Yeah, and I would just say that I think that
but that was a positive, I saw.
Yeah, very positive, and I appreciate you pointing that out. I think Municipal League pulled out some, certainly, and they state very clearly in the beginning of the report, this is not intended to be a data analysis of the performance of school districts. I think they selectively pulled out some data sets that illustrated differences in levels of performance based on demographics or funding levels, or, trying to weave that back into
How school boards operate.
how school boards operate, how they function, right, their roles and the results they're achieving. So,
We can all be proud of that.
absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah, I thought that was.
But the primary intent of the report is about school board governance.
Correct.
Yeah,
But they also use that to highlight whether your board, one of the areas of whether your board is doing a good job, and your administration is doing a good job, so. That's
I thought there were a lot of, really like Larry said, it's just really interesting insight on board governance and what makes a good board member and what procedures and policies should you have in place. And it is really a great tool to revisit, I think, often and regularly, I think, so. And I just like one goal we have for the report is to encourage a culture of self-examination and continuous learning on school boards. And I just think there's a lot of material in there for personal self-reflection and just good food for thought. So I appreciated the report. Any other thoughts, or do you want to?
I just kind of was doing a quick review. There's 7 recommendations in there. Some we're doing and some I definitely heard other board members express interest in doing, and I'm really glad to hear that it spoke to the 3 of us that are continuing on, so we can continue to use it perhaps as a resource.
Yeah, I think addressing maybe when the new board gets on that first question, what kind of, I think what I intend to hear from WASDA and from our training is that there's only one type of board. At least that's a message that, and we all must mold into this type of board. At least that's what I hear. But what I'm seeing here, there are different ways of doing business, and they all still meet the same goal, but they all do it just a little bit differently. The 4 different types of governance. And, that just might be a good topic of conversation, and when we have our new board and being able to kind of look at those. Do those change over time? Do they stay stable? Do you move in and out of them? It's kind of like as a psychologist, you take on a counseling framework. Neither one of them is necessarily right or wrong, but you kind of take one as your primary and you claim that, but that doesn't mean someone else's isn't, using that as an analogy.
Well, and on the same side, I liked the different models they had, and I also there are very specific recommendations. I mean, there's a good 2 dozen very specific where, like Janet referenced, there's several that we're doing and several that we could become stronger on. So it would be great to dive into, I think, in 2016 at an appropriate point.
Sometimes, I know in the past WASDA has had Thomas Alsbury, the advocate for the balanced governance approach, at the WASDA conference, so you have an opportunity to hear him. He's a very interesting speaker too, so, yeah. Thank you for bringing very much.